All right.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Right.
I'm good. So we're continuing the discussion of technology and faith. First, we'll do a quick review of last week. So we've already went through the wheel, various forms of the wheel, the pen, paper, lots of different forms of kind of low tech, simple technology.
Technology we understand.
Yes. Technology we forget is technology many times. And we got to see how all this technology in some form or another has helped spread the word. And even the wheel in its various forms, different scientific applications, has assisted in that spreading of the word. So this week we're going to go into some new ones. But before that, I want to add two Bible verses to our lesson. The first one is Luke 8, 5 through 8. Is the parable of the sower. The sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden down, and the fowls of the air devoured it. Some fell upon a rock, and as soon as it was sprung up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. And some fell upon thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. And other fell on good ground, and sprang up, and bare fruit 100-fold. When he had said these things, he cried, "He that hath ears to hear, let him hear." And the other verse, Romans 10, 14 through 15. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good things. So the first one, the parable of the sower and the seeds, we see that the sower is spreading seed out across all the ground. And sometimes the ground takes, sometimes it doesn't. The only person that I talked to Aaron about this, make sure I wasn't completely off base, the only person that knows what the good seed or what the good ground is, where the bad ground is God. We don't know. And so we should try and spread the word throughout everywhere. And I found a unique website with a blog that took this verse and applied it to technology as well. And so they give a very similar definition of, here's what this parable means. Here's the description of it, how to interpret it in modern days. And then they say, as Christians, we are expected to do the same. We should not be selective of whom we extend ourselves to, but rather aim to spread Christ's message to as many people as possible. And technology lets us connect with a bigger audience than ever before. And today, we'll be seeing how a unique piece of technology we still use today still allows us to connect to more people than we ever could. And then Romans, of course, in biblical times, we know that the only way to carry the word around was by foot. Sometimes we had a ship with Paul's journey, but there was not a large option, or a vast majority of options to carry that word around. And so the intent behind this definition or this interpretation of Romans is to show that it does not matter how you get the word there. It is the fact that you get it there. So using vehicles, using different methods of spreading the word is perfectly fine. It doesn't just have to be the same way they did it in the Bible. So this week we're going to step into the age of electrical technology. And so we'll start out in 1830 to 1840. The telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse. We all know about Morse code. It was used widely during the exploration of the West to get information out everywhere. And I imagine at some point in time, some preacher probably used a telegraph to send some message to a flock out west or back to the East Coast to spread the good news of things happening. In 1848, make sure my slides are coming up well there. Wire photo, excuse me, an early form of scanning and faxing. In 1877, the phonograph by Thomas Edison. Everybody knows what the phonograph is, a thing. I had researched it a little bit. I knew the name. I apologize. I'm not trying to be rude.
Just call one of us hairs. We didn't know. We could have got you right on it.
But Thomas Edison in 1877 invented the first phonograph using a tin-foil cylinder, and for the first time sounds could be recorded and played. So, and we've seen this used in churches many times. A lot of churches I've been at, they record on little cassette tapes. So it's not exactly a phonograph anymore, but it's been based off of that and continues to be something that you know, you can back and listen to services from 50 years ago.
You also have a Bible on there.
Yeah. Yeah. In 1886, electromagnetic waves were proven to exist by Heinrich Hertz. So we've all heard the term Hertz, you know, 50 megahertz, whatever Hertz. You know, it's named after the guy that invented or discovered it, as is the case normally. And that quickly led to the first radio station in 1920, KDKA. First goes on air in 1920. So this is some of the early technology that is moving forward into you know, sound. All this is primarily based on sound, except for wire photo. But a lot of it is based on sound, and then we get into the actual radio and being able to broadcast sound waves across the air. Now, early on, the radio itself, in 1830 to 1840, believe it or not, a Christian physicist, James Clerk Maxwell, was the first one to theorize about radio waves. Now, I never knew that until I did research on this. I didn't know he was a Christian. I had no clue. But I imagine that while he may not have sought out, I was like, oh, radio waves, let me find this and use this as a way to spread the word. He may not have had that in mind initially. But I do firmly believe that God guided him in his research to eventually find this thing. Now, he theorized that they existed, and it was Hertz who actually took that theory and proved it, and by creating the first radio. So with that theorization happening, again, we have on January 2nd, 1921, the KDKA broadcasts the first religious sermon. Now this happened just 2 months to the day after KDKA first broadcast, their first ever broadcast. So 2 months after radio is a public thing, it's out there for everybody to see, we've already got a sermon being broadcast. Now, interesting story behind this. It was undertaken by Weinstein House to test his ability to do a remote broadcast far from the studio. And so Pittsburgh Calvary Episcopal Church was chosen because one of the Weinstein House engineers happened to be a member of the choir and made the arrangements with them. The junior pastor, however, Reverend Louis B. Whitmore, was preached the sermon that was broadcast on the air because the senior pastor was leery of using this new technology. He was one of the few that, well, maybe not few, but he's the senior pastor. He resisted using new technology. He did not see it as something that Christians should be using. He still allowed it. He was open-minded enough to allow his junior pastor to take on the role and preach that sermon. A little bit more, just unique information about that. The technicians running the program, one of them was a Jew, one was a Catholic, and they were outfitted with choir robes in order to keep them from distracting the congregation. So they're up there, they get the choir robes on, got this gear, and they're up there to make sure everything's being broadcast right. But that was the first ever broadcast of a sermon on the air.
When did you say this took place?
1921, January 2nd.
Where?
Oh, where?
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, yes, I believe so. Yeah, Pittsburgh. And then KDA continued to broadcast Sunday evening services until 1962. And eventually the senior pastor came around and started preaching as well. And up until that point, he was like, Yeah, I'll just let the junior pastor do it. But they continued on for many years afterwards. So we do have examples there, a very prime example of how there were some ministers that viewed radio as a frivolity, if not an outright evil, and they resisted using the medium to spread the gospel. But we do have examples of many others who actually went ahead and used it. Paul Rader founded the WJBT, where Jesus blessed thousands, and he was based in Chicago. He was a pioneer for radio sermons in Chicago. And shortly after that, here's something I've actually found very neat. Radio was a technology that we as Christians jumped on very quickly. 2 months after the first radio broadcast, we were already on there spreading the word. And radar actually went so far with it that many of the government policies we have now regarding the radio and religious being broadcast on the radio, that happened when Paul Radar started broadcasting. Because he got it out there. He got, he just really pushed it forward. And the government was like, well, this is, religion's getting out of hand, so let's put some regulations. But the fact that we, as Christians, we got into this so quickly, and it spread, we'll see here in a few minutes how many people was reached by radio, that, why don't we do that more often than jump on these new technologies? So the growth of the religious programming eventually led to the formation of the National Religious Broadcasters on September 21st, 1944. And their convention, they hold that at the Chicago's Moody Memorial Church. So, and continuing on with the radio, we have in 1930s, the Great Depression, there was a big resurgence of revival tents. So you got your preachers going around doing revivals, and many of those revival preachers actually decided to broadcast their revivals as well on the radio. So a lot of them actually started up their own shortwave radio stations, and wherever they set up the revival tent at, they broadcast the revival, they move on, and their station would go with them as well. To the right one here. So in 1923, S. Parks Cabin, and that's the one pictured there. He was one of the first ministers to use the radio extensively, and in 1928, he had a weekly Sunday afternoon radio broadcast on NBC Radio Network, and it reached an audience of nearly 5 million people, just on the radio. And I keep forgetting, actually, half of these things in the end is bullet points. In 1930, Amy Semple McPherson, she was another pioneering tent revivalist, and she turned to radio to reach a larger audience as well. Eventually, she went nationwide in the 1920s and 1930s, and she even built one of the earliest Pentecostal mega churches. So not only do we have not only do we have what is generally, a lot of religious organizations, everything, it's men. 9 times out of 10 it's men. But even the early, in the early part of the radio, we do have the women of the faith stepping up and spreading the gospel and really putting on a good word in for, hey, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you're a Christian, you believe what you're doing, and you're doing the right thing, you can get it accomplished. Now, we've all heard of Bob Jones Sr., I imagine. He's got college that's still going. They still have a radio station. I believe they still own that radio station.
Yeah.
Unique FM.
The MUU.
Oh,
They changed it. It used to be Unique FM back when I listened to it all the time.
Yeah.
But he, now these are the years that he actually broadcast, not his lifetime. He broadcast from 1927 to 1962. Ralph W. Stockman from 1928 to 1962 as well. And just a few more there. Loman, 1930 to 1965. And then there's a radio station, music and spoken word, that is still going today from 1929. And the Lutheran Hour.
That's the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and that music, or is that the one music? Is that, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it comes from Salt Lake City.
Okay.
Because we used to, when we were on the way to church, we played that because beautiful music. Of course, you can imagine the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing. I'm trying to remember from the crossroads of the west.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Lutheran Hour from 1930 to the present. Excuse me. So these are just a few examples of the bigger names in radio that have spread the word. So many stations are still spreading, maybe not necessarily within all the same beliefs, all the same convictions that we have as Presbyterians, but the base message in many cases is still the same. It's getting out there to people.
Do you know if anything happened in 1962? Because I noticed the last guy, or that first radio station stopped in 62, and Bob Jones and Stockman both stopped.
Yeah, I believe in the case of Bob Jones and Stockman is when they passed away, and so it's just probably handed off to somebody else. KDKA, I believe, I think they're still in there, but I think that they changed the format. And because of the laws that the government put on there, no longer that shifted things to where Christian organizations actually had to have their own private radio stations now. So that's where the poll basically. So Bob Jones Sr. with Bob Jones and their radio station, they have no regulation on them as how much they can put the word on there because it's a private radio station. So a lot of your public radio stations like KDKA and 93.3 Planet, et cetera, they're not going to have a lot of religious things on there because they're public stations and they've got that regulation. But I think that's really where that change probably is happening at, and that's why those years are important. Time Magazine did a report in 1946. Reverend Ralph Sockman's national radio pulpit on NBC received 4,000 letters weekly, and Roman Catholic Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen received between 3,000 and 6,000 letters weekly. And the total radio audience for radio ministries in the U.S. that year was estimated to be 10 million listeners. So with the radio alone, 10 million, if not more, people were being reached in the early days of the radio, early years of the radio. This led to in TV later on led to a term being coined. I have the name of it. Televangelism. Now, initially when I saw television, I said, okay, it's television. But televangelism, is just referring to using technology, both in TV airwaves and radio airwaves. So many of these preachers were considered to be televangelists, and they reached millions and millions of people. Now, there's no record. I don't think probably can't find any record of how many people were saved based off of this. I'm sure there were some people that got saved, maybe didn't notify the radio station. I'm sure there's some that did notify the radio station. The station probably kept up with so many people led to the Lord from our ministry. But again, I go back to the point of the tracks. We reach 10 million people with the radio. If just one of them got saved, then we've done our work. We've gone out and spread the word. Now, I don't have this on here, but before we move on to TV, the radio is still used today to reach people that we can't actually get to physically. Now, that's just not here in America, but that's also in countries where Christianity is illegal. So missionaries oftentimes will go set up a shortwave radio station in a neighboring country where it is legal, and they may even, their mission field may be that area, but then they also add in the radio so they can reach across the border to where it's illegal. And again, I don't know if there's any way to actually accurately see if anybody's listening or not, but I'm sure there are. And so the radio gives us that because there's no way to stop it. The airwaves are going, and it's going to get to those people if they want to listen to it. So that's a very good example of how this piece of technology, while it is, you know, from 1920, it's not really considered a modern piece of technology anymore, but it's still used and is still very powerful in spreading the word. So the next piece of electrical technology is the TV. I won't go too much into the history of how it was created, but we'll start out with the first public TV broadcast was in 1929 in Germany. The first TV interview was in 1930 in Britain. And the public world premiere of TV was in 1931. And then the first sermon was in 1949. So we got a little bit slow. We jumped on the radio 2 months after it, was made public, but we waited 18 years to jump into TV. But we still had there's a lot of success in there still. The pioneers of religious TV, Jack Wartzman and Percy Crawford, so that's one thing I don't like about this. It doesn't scroll back up and it's a new page. So they started out in the spring of 1949, and so they were the first ones writing. I don't know if they were the first ones. I couldn't find anything about what the actual first sermon was, who the preacher was. But these two were the names that pop up when it comes to being pioneers of the religion on TV. And they started in the same year that the first sermon was. Now, Fulton J. Sheen was on the radio for 2 decades, and he switched to TV in 1951. And Time magazine actually called him the first televangelist, because the term didn't really get coined until TV was out, but it did refer to both TV and radio. And he got termed the first televangelist because he had been 2 decades on the radio, and then he was going to the TV as well. As far as I know, he kept up the radio as well while he was broadcasting on TV. And he actually won numerous Emmy Awards for his program that ran from the early 1950s until late 1960s, and that is him in the picture. So, I mean, nowadays you're not going to find a lot of Emmys being awarded to Christian ministers on the TV or anything like that. But in the early days, he did so well, he impressed so many people that he actually won Emmys for his work. In 1952, Brooks Humbard became the first to have a weekly church service broadcast on television after moving away from radio. And by 1980, the Rex Humbard program spanned the globe across 695 stations in 91 languages, and to date is still the largest coverage of any evangelistic program ever. Nobody's gotten that big.
So you're back.
I don't know. I tried to. Sometimes I might get a little bit biased and have grown up Baptist, so I tried to avoid. That's just, as long as the core message is right, I'll include them. And then the 1960s and early 70s saw the television replace radio as the primary home entertainment medium. And this also corresponded with the further rise of evangelical Christianity, particularly through the international television radio ministry of Billy Graham. We've all heard of him. So he is, while not a pioneer of getting religion on the TV to start out with, but he was a big name that really making it even more popular. And then there's so many other well-known names. They all began during that same period. And notably, we have the Oral Roberts, Jimmy Swaggart, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I believe that's a husband and wife duo.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. Most of them developed their own media networks, news exposure, and political influence. So again, we see because the government is putting the regulations, the whole separation of church and state issue. But in order to circumvent that and the loophole, many of these broadcasters founded their own networks. So we have, I believe there's still, I don't watch TV at all anymore, but I believe there's still like channel 16, a Christian-owned and operated channel. And so that's a good example of, they're able to broadcast religion 24/7 because it is a privately owned station. Whereas, many of the other stations, you might get the occasional mega church broadcast and everything, but that's only going to be on Sundays, whereas the privately owned ones, they have it 24/7. So we're going to go to the controversy. We've already mentioned a little bit that there was that one preacher that who didn't really want to do it, and there are other preachers that said it's frivolous, it's not going to do anything, and there's some that went to the point of saying radio is evil. There have been some that said that about TV as well. So that's wrong button. Yeah, it's not going to. Eric, would you mind hitting the next area? There's some bullet points on there that should be coming up.
Okay. No.
There we go. So 2009. Now this is a recent one. I know, we've got a lot of the early days, the early preachers on TV and everything. All have their hearts in the right place and everything. And they did the right thing. But later on, we have some that are probably false. They're just doing it for the money. John MacArthur speaks out against them in the modern television preachers. His article goes like this: someone needs to say this plainly. The faith healers and health and well preachers who dominate religious television are shameless frauds. Their message is not the true gospel of Jesus Christ. There's nothing spiritual or miraculous about their onstage chicanery. It is all devious ruse designed to take advantage of desperate people. They are not godly ministers, but greedy impostors who corrupt the word of God for money's sake. They are not real pastors who shepherd the flock of God, but hirelings whose only design is to fleece the sheep. Their love of money and is glaringly obvious in what they say as well as how they live. They claim to possess great spiritual power, but in reality, they are rank materialists and enemies of everything holy. So that's a very in-your-face. This is now not necessarily speaking out against TV and using TV as a medium, but what, in his opinion, many TV preachers have turned it into. And there is actually some proof to that. Go ahead, the next couple right there.
That's the wrong.
Yeah, go ahead until you see the clip. So, they're not accountable. Many of your TV preachers are not part of any kind of organization. Their financials and everything else, they're not accountable to anybody as far as what they're actually doing. A lot of them get very political, starting influencing political parties and everything. And not always in the direction that the Bible would, our interpretation of the Bible would tell us to influence it. There was an actual FBI investigation into several, and we discovered, I don't have that here, there were, because I didn't want to put names, I don't want to be the one to put a lane out there and be wrong about it, but there is evidence to show that some of these preachers on the TV that are, they're doing, you've been healed and everything, asking for offerings and everything, they're driving around in a fleet of Rolls Royces. They have multiple houses, multiple of those houses are mansions. And the FBI investigation into that could not rectify that they were using financials in any kind of religious manner, or the way a church would. So I firmly believe that it started out really well, and I think that there are still many out there that are doing it the right way. In my opinion, I think Channel 16 is still good, good message. But then there are those, mega churches, and I think I said this once before, but I'm not a fan of mega churches. Once your church gets so big that you're thinking about building a church or expanding churches, kind of plant another church, spread the word. And mega churches just starts to just bring it all together and keep it in one place. And so a lot of your churches that have these big sermons like that, and they're doing all these things and collecting all this money, Those are several $1,000 shoes those preachers wear. It just doesn't sit right with me. But so that's an example of how, I mean, it has been corrupted, but it still can be used for a good thing. The technology itself is not corrupted. The way that people use it is. And go and hit the next one. So, and that'll be it. That's the last one. So, sit down for that. I appreciate it. There are radical Christians. We've all heard about radical Muslims and terrorists. There's radical Christians as well. The Crusades was led by radical Christians. There's not much, the Crusades and everything that happened there is not much different from the terrorism they have going on now from the Muslim religion. And not all Muslims are radical, not all Christians are radical. But in particular, relating directly to technology, I found an article on a website called aggressivechristianity.net. You can look it up if you want to, just be ready to be very embarrassed. Embarrassed as Christians. I'm going to read a few of these paragraphs. I'm going to read all of the titles because they got several paragraphs, and each one has a bold title. This is what this paragraph is about. But the article is entitled, "Kill Your Television." The secret weapon. The greatest threat to the existence of our society today is not air pollution or water pollution, but mind pollution. For the first time in history, man has an instrument through which the masses can be taught and controlled effectively, immediately and effortlessly. That instrument is television. The most devastating brainwashing device ever unleashed upon humanity. To deny that television is a brainwashing tool, teaching and motivating people on a daily basis to deny reality. In the hands of militant sodomites who have effectively infiltrated all major media, television has proved to be the secret weapon in their blatant attempts to capture the youth of the world. So I'll pause right there for a moment. We see a lot of very sane ideas and everything come out about video games. And there's a lot of violent video games, there's a lot of violent TV shows, there's a lot of violent everything. Everybody gets something violent, there's some way to turn it. So, sure, they have a point. There is a lot of bad on the TV. There are ways that the people, the producers and everything, create the shows to be a bit brainwashed. So, I agree with that point. But, throughout this entire article, not once do they mention anything about how the TV has been good. Or, how preachers have been on the TV, how there are still good stations out there, or how you can actually stream what you watch. They're just like, no, just get rid of it, destroy it. Blue news for you. The television is the devil's instrument and is used for destruction of the soul. The television is an instrument. The devil does not control any one instrument. None of it is actually his. All of these pieces of technology, the TV, the radio, musical instruments, the printing press, everything is just technology. The technology itself is not evil and does not belong to any one deity or man. It is up to the person that uses it to decide how they're going to use it and if they're going to use it for good or evil. They've got another one, electrified evil, and they're talking about how the electricity, it's a very crazy part. Permanent brain damage. According to the latest mental health alert poll, an amazing 9 out of 10 people say they actually believe what they see on television to be an accurate representation of reality. Experts agree that the results of recent studies show people who watch more TV are prone to paranoia, emotional distress, and multiple personality syndrome. Many report being unable to distinguish between television and real life. Others say they feel like they are being manipulated and report almost uncontrollable urges to imitate behavior they have viewed on TV. I find that to be a problem with the people that are not screening TV. Many of these polls that get taken, they get directed towards the youth. And these youth they'll just answer whatever they. I mean, there's probably some incentive for them to take the poll, but they're on the internet all the time. They're taking these polls, and a lot of them probably didn't have parents guiding them in the right direction on what to watch on TV or what to avoid on TV. And also, they don't have imaginations. Obviously, the TV, 9 times out of 10, is just a show. It's entertainment. It is not reality. And even your reality TV shows are scripted, so they're not reality. The only thing you can watch on TV and say, well, this is probably reality, is the news. And even then, you've got fake news on both sides. Both sides of it. Television has become a surrogate parent. Surrogate substitute. The parent of American children is the television. The TV has become the governing factor in American homes. The television, in its idiocy, has been responsible for the formation of millions of mindless robots who do only what the TV tells them to do, and I'm not going to read the rest of that. It's true. The TV has, in many cases, become something that parents are just a kid down in front of. And I don't feel like dealing with you right now. Here, watch this, and then they don't watch what the kid is watching. Or and we'll get into this next week a little bit. They'll just hand over a phone, play a game, watch YouTube. They don't monitor what the kid is watching. And there are many ways in other technological ways where you can actually monitor what your kid is watching on TV or what they're doing on the tablet. There are applications on the phone to where you can set it up to where only certain applications are accessible without a password. So to go at it the way that they are, and just, again, they're hitting the technology itself. They're not at all addressing the responsibility that we as Christians have to use this technology correctly. This is a very long article. And I have many other things, issues with their website in general. But if you want to talk about that later on, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. I love ranting about that website there. But I think the thing we need to take away from this, in conjunction with the Bible verses, is it's not up to us to decide who deserves to hear the word. It's not up to us to decide how we get the word there. It's up to us to decide to do it, to use the technology that is not evil or good, but to use it for good, and to make sure our actions are in the right path and in alignment with God's will. And don't let things like that place. Because if you just read that article itself is brainwashing. They're bashing brainwashing, but they're doing it themselves. That can be very discouraging. If you've grown up watching TV, or if you've grown up like me, I'm into technology. That is my livelihood. And then I read something like that from, and if I were to approach that and see them as a authority on religion and how I should be living my life, then that would really get me. Very much so. But we can't do it. We have to approach it the way God would have us to do it. Look at the world and not judge anything without looking into it first. Open-minded, being open-minded. But don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. I saw that on the church sign the other day. I was like, that's pretty smart. We should be open-minded. We should be looking for ways that we can further God's will, spread the word, using the technology in the right way. So, that's all I got. I think I did a little better today on timelines. So any questions, comments, discussion, please?
I had one experience when I was in banking in the early 70s with a gentleman that came in every Friday. He did not have a lot of money. He wanted to do everything he could, but he got tied in. It was probably Reverend Aaron, because there was somebody in California that was on TV or something like that. And he was sending, we started off at 10% of whatever day. Come in with his check, cash his check, and then go get it, and then ask for a cashier's check, X amount. And he'd go right to the post office behind our bank and go mail it every Friday. Well, it got, had one of the tellers come, I was managing that branch, and the teller came over to me after he had left and said, Mr. Jones, I'm called Mayor's son, asked me to help him calculate a percentage because he had heard recently several sermons, and they were now saying that he really, people didn't need as much money as they had, and they really needed to send more to him, and he was sending 50% of his paycheck at that point. And you know, it's one of those things you struggle with. The next time he came in, I asked him, I said, can I talk to him? And we sat down and talked, and he said, no, he says he needs it more than I do, kind of stuff. And he was bound and determined. We finally convinced him that maybe, you know, talks to some people.
Yeah.
Y'all must want to cry. Because he was very much of a day laborer, whatever, I'm not sure exactly what he did.
Yeah,
Not sure what.
that's a perfect example of how people that you know, study the word and really know, and they're good at speaking the truth, convincing people, and they're taking somebody who's a little bit weaker in their faith and convincing them of stuff that really, you know, is not true. Any other questions or comments?
Quick comment on a technology that is obviously evil when it first came out was the organ. Absolutely, when the organ started, that has no place in the church at all. It's a terrible, it is Satan's instrument. It was because organ started out in bars apparently, and so they brought it into the church, and people just went nuts. Today, now you would ask, you know, what's the most holy and sanctified musical instrument? Well, it's obviously the organ. Yeah.
You'll find one in every church nowadays.
Because we're so afraid to change.
Good job.
I think that's all. We'll go ahead and pray and dismiss to the service. Lord, thank you for allowing us to come here today and to learn from your word. Please help us to move forward with our lives, keeping in mind the commandment you've given us to go forth and spread the word, and help us to find the right ways of spreading that word, to use whatever technology we may be able to use to spread your word, and not completely resist technology because we see it as evil or others have told us that it's evil. Be with us today as we continue into the morning service, and help us to learn the word there and apply it to our lives. In Jesus' name.
This is really interesting.
But next week,